Coming up next on the Union Label, we have a conversation with Brandon Duncan, President of Steelworkers Local 727 at Calvert City. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Barry. Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
I'd like to begin by asking you the same question. It's a two-part question, all of my guests. What has the labor movement meant to you personally, and what do you think the labor movement has meant to the working class in this country?
Well, those are some tough questions. Let me just put it like that. As far as what it's meant to me, when I first started out working up at Calvert City, I was 23. So,
and you work at which plant?
It's called Evonik Paducah Corporation. So it's a plant on the backside of what used to be the Air Products complex. Air Products at one time had a lot of that up there at Calvert City, and slowly they've sold off different sections. So the section that I work at sold off in the 80s, and then I was hired in 1993.
So what does your plant manufacture?
We manufacture catalysts, different forms of catalysts, whether it's for the oil industry, pharmaceutical industry, or for the beverage industry, with the beer companies and things like that.
So these are, they're chemical catalysts.
They are chemical catalysts.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So you were 23 when you went to work there?
23 when I went to work.
Where'd you work before that?
Before that, I worked at Coal Lumber, and and then in between there, I worked at Vulcan Material or Reed Crush Stone up there in Lake City. Mm-hmm. So, got a pretty hard education, you know, working some of those things, because the rock quarry is a tough place to work. Any of those guys that work up there, I respect them a whole lot. So,
mm-hmm. So you were hired in at 23?
At 23. And kind of did my job, had 2 kids, you know, I raised those. And as I started getting on up, I started, you know, I was receiving the benefits that a lot of people had sacrificed before me. I didn't know what it exactly meant to, I knew what it meant to be a union member, but I didn't know what it meant to be a union leader. And so I started an education, trying to learn what the union was about. I became a union steward, sat in on a negotiating committee, and then my president, Randy Johnson, encouraged me to take it a little bit further, and I had a staff rep, Ron Spann, who come in and actually pointed me in the right direction. And in the last 6 years, I can definitely say there's a passion within everybody who is in a leadership within their local unions or within the union period, that it just strikes a nerve with you and it hits a chord, because you want to see everybody fairly represented. You don't want to see anybody mistreated. You don't want to see anybody degraded. And like I say, it's something that's born within you, and whenever it takes a hold, it's there to stay. So. Steward,
I guess that's the lowest elected official in a local union, typically, would it not?
Typically, yes.
What do you think makes a good union steward?
A person that's willing to listen. You listen to the grievant, listen to what they have to say. If they actually have a grievance, sometimes a lot of people, they don't have one. You know, there is something there, but it's usually not something wrong with their contract, or usually it's not something, it's a little bit more than that. But whenever somebody does have a grievance, a good steward knows how to handle it, knows how to follow it coming on up, and they try to get it resolved. And most of the time, I would say 90 to 95% of grievances get solved at that first step. Mm-hmm. So, you know, to have a good union steward or stewards, it's essential within the local.
What was your next elected office after steward?
I was a trustee on our local. They watch over the finances, take care of the local, make sure everything's running as is. They're kind of a separate organization. You have the president, the financial president, and the ones that's here. The trustees kind of keep an eye on those to make sure everything's taken care of as the way it should be. Mm-hmm. So it kind of gives you an outside perspective, kind of hands off, but then again, it is an essential function mm-hmm. of the local unions.
And of course, you're the financial secretary-treasurer of the area council too. We'll talk mm-hmm. about that a little bit later on. Now, did you start out with the Steelworkers?
No, I actually started out in OCAW, which is the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers.
Right.
And used to be a very independent union. I think as far as the traditional makeup, it taught us to think for ourselves, not to rely so much on the international, but to take action at the local levels. We settle a lot of grievances where I think maybe sometime if you rely more on your staff reps when they come in, I think it makes their job easier whenever they have an old OCAW local that has that kind of traditional aspect where you handle all your business within in the lower ranks. So.
And then OCAW became part of PACE?
It did. And then we wasn't PACE for too long, but that's where we had several different staff reps that come in. And then shortly after that, I think we was PACE for maybe 3 years. And then for the last, I think for 5 years or 6 years, we've been with the Steelworkers. So the majority of my time has still been spent with the OCAW, and that's mm-hmm. where my traditions mm-hmm. come from. So,
what is the basic? You've been in 3 different unions. What is the key difference between among these 3 unions, Steelworkers, PACE, and OCAW? Would you say from your perspective?
In my perspective, my opinion, the OCAW was, like I said, more independent. They had it was more driven from the bottom, so to speak, bottom down. And that's good, but it has its own, own facets within that. The PACE part of it, wasn't really a whole lot involved with that similar structure, so I can't really comment on that a whole lot. The Steelworkers organization is more like, I wouldn't say top-down driven, because it sometimes feels like that, but that's because they have the resources and everything set up to help you out. So it feels like anytime you need the information, you call to Pittsburgh or you call to Nashville, and you get the information. So it kind of feels like it's a top-down driven, but in essence, it's a very democratic organization. I will say that.
Of course, every office of the union is elected, from steward right up to the international president, is it not?
That is true. And I think what a lot of people don't know about unions is anytime you hold an office, you cannot be a convicted felon. You cannot have any type of record or anything like that. So whenever you do have people that is sets in in a leadership position, you know that they are very straight up individuals of the community. Mm-hmm. So, mm-hmm. and some people think sometimes that that's not that way. So,
how many members does your local have?
200.
200 members.
Yeah.
And you went from trustee to president then?
I went to vice president.
Vice president.
Yeah. Within our local, I'd mentioned before that Air Products has sold off different units. We have, of course, Air Products is still up there. We have a company called Sekisui, which is a Japanese company, just got bought, the Celanese plant in 2009. We have Westlake PVC, Valker Chemical, and then my plant that I work for. So there's actually 5 different companies with 5 different contracts that we represent within our local. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So proved challenging in its own way, because each of those companies has different management structures. They have different goals that they want to meet and different expectations out of their managers to perform. So, mm-hmm. and whenever our goals match up with each other, the goals from our local and the goals from the company, we can do a lot of good things. And sometimes, you know, they're under cost pressures, and we know that as a local that we do have to help these companies succeed. And you know, we do what we can. But then again, at the same time, we stand up for our members and make sure that their benefits and their pay, their pension and everything's taken care of too.
Mm-hmm. I ask you, what makes a good union steward? That's the lowest level. Now you're at the top, you're the president. What makes a good union president?
You got to be able to listen. I refer back to the two presidents before me. Randy Johnson, he was my president for 15 years. He listened to both sides. He listened to his members, and he listened to what, you know, these companies had to say. Sometimes he didn't always agree with the members, and sometimes, you know, he didn't always agree with what the companies had to say. That's one aspect of it. You know, he did a very good job. And for somebody to be elected for 15 years and to hold that position, that is a tremendous asset to him and to his personality. The president before that was Kip Phillips. And, you know, you have to take on the leadership role. And I will say this about being the president: you have to make decisions, which if anybody kind of knew me before I stepped into this role, especially my wife, she'd be like, you know, you just can't make a decision. But you do learn to make decisions, and you have to be willing to put yourself out there, and you have to be able to learn from your decisions, because you're not going to make all the right decisions, and I'll tell you that, but you have to learn from your decisions. And so those are a couple aspects.
I think any elected position in politics or president of a union is the same thing. On the one hand, you've got to represent the people who elected you, but on the other hand, they elected you to show leadership. And you've got to take chances. You've got to go out on a limb sometime. And of course, in an elective office, if you go out on a limb too far, sometimes the limb gets sawed off and you're defeated.
Oh yeah, and I've been there, and I've heard that saw being cut behind me, you know, and they'll be like, Brandon, you're a little bit too far, you know.
Yeah.
But you have to be willing, like you said, to get out there on that limb, to tell your members and show your members, this is what we have to do. And if you don't, then you're not going to get anything or anywhere, and you're not going to get anything accomplished. And a lot of things has to deal with safety. You know, those chemical plants up there can be extremely dangerous. Don't get me wrong, they can be extremely dangerous. And we as people, whether you're company or union, you have to look out for each other. And sometimes those lines are, I wouldn't say skewed, but cost comes into effect and things like that. But you do have to look out for each other. So.
Well, OCAW is famous among unions for their concern of safety. Of course, a lot of the OCW, well, out here at the gaseous diffusion plant, which I still call the atomic plant to show my age.
A lot of great people out there.
Nuclear plant, and safety was always a big concern. OCAW is famous for that.
Yep. Yeah, I've got a lot of good friends out there, and they have, you know, in the past, there's been a lot of things that's come up through their safety programs, and they've been pretty innovative in some of the stuff that they've done. And like I said, you know, a lot of great people work out there on both sides.
And of course, they're steel workers too now.
Yep, they are too.
Yeah. We've talked about this before, and I've talked about this with lots of union folks, is how do you motivate younger members to participate? Now, obviously you started young and came up, and people I've had on the program, Ron Spann, Jeff Wiggins, started young. How do you motivate young people to participate, to come to monthly union meetings? I will say no one's able to answer this question. It's a hard question, but any thoughts on that?
As being the president, you have to give them the opportunity. You have to be able to listen, because you can close somebody off so quickly and not even know it. To be in the position that I am, you know, I want to educate somebody, and I want for somebody else to do a better job than me. You have to look to your younger people, because I have a certain mentality and a certain way that I've been taught. And in order to have a good, strong local union, you've got to get your younger people involved. And I will say, as far as our plants up there at Calvert City, there's going to be a lot of people retire in the next 5-6 years. And so the statistics is almost half turnover ratio in amongst those plants. And I think the college out here knows it, and they got a program that's teaching that. But as far as to get the younger people involved, I think the steelworkers are doing a pretty good job as far as having things out there, because, you know, they're not only looking at the traditional roles within the union, but they're also looking at the roles outside and what they can do, whether it's through different alliances that they've formed, or whether it's through their media packages, or whether it's through an organization that we offer through the steelworkers called the Women of Steel. There's a lot of things there, but as local presidents and local people upon the e-board, we have to be willing to seek those people out, ask them, continually ask them, and not to close them off. Because sometimes when people have new ideas, you have to learn to accept those new ideas and see where they go. So,
sort of along those same lines, I've talked to a number of union presidents, and obviously when you went to work for the plant at Calvert, that was a huge raise in salary, I'm sure. Not just that, benefits, everything. That suddenly it's this incredible job. It's a lifetime job. And I've heard union officials say that sometimes unions fall down by not explaining to the new members that it was the union that got that. It wasn't the company out of the goodness of its heart that's paying you this big wage, a good wage and good benefits, that this is a real struggle, and that unions really ought to do something to sit down with new members and explain to them, these are union one wages and benefits. What do you all do like that in your plant with the steel workers?
First of all, as far as what I do with the presidents when new people hire in or they come up there to take their oath, I tell them 3 things. I said, well, actually it's a lot more than that, but you know, the first thing is whatever you do is never lie. You know, this is kind of my speech to them. If you lie, it looks bad on you, and you set the own precedent for your own type of personality and what people think of you. If you're always honest and truthful, even no matter what the circumstances are, that is the best policy for everything, and you'll get a lot further, especially when it comes to discipline. It's so easy for people to just try to lie their way out of it, and the truth will eventually come out. So that's one thing I say. You never steal. You're going to make plenty of money up there at those plants. Stealing is just not a good practice. If you need a pair of gloves or a pair of safety glasses, all you got to do is ask, because they would much rather you practice safety at home as to get hurt at home. Because if you get hurt at home, then you're no longer a benefit to them. And the third thing I tell people is don't abuse alcohol and don't use drugs, because you may get one chance, but the path of destruction that you leave behind you to yourself, to your family, to the people around you is terrible. So those are the 3 things that I start out telling everybody. As far as in the plant, what I tell them is learn your job. You have to learn your job. You know, 6 months, 9 months, sometimes it takes up to a year or more to learn those processes. And you have to learn your job, because they're intricate, they're detailed, and if you don't, you can hurt a lot of people really quick. So you have to learn your job. That's kind of what I tell them when I first start out.
In a chemical plant, of course, I'm thinking in terms of a steel mill. Historically, a steel mill, that would be a lot more, I guess, physical labor. Mm-hmm. Whereas in a chemical plant, I mean, I'm sure you all deal with computers and all that now.
We do. A lot of our processes are computerized. In fact, I would say most of them are. We still have a few that is manual, but usually they're smaller batch sizes. A lot of it is chemically done by computers. So that's one thing you have to learn. You have to learn how all that stuff's done, you know, when reactions are supposed to take place, temperature, heat, pressure, you know, all those things are critical. But at the same time, you have to learn how to protect yourself from those chemicals, because anybody that works up there at those plants will tell you sooner or later you are going to have, or you will be exposed to those chemicals one way or the other, and you have to learn how to protect yourself. And that's putting on, whether it's an SCBA or the masks and the shields, because, you know, the world ain't perfect, and sometimes those plants aren't perfect. So, you know, you have to get in there, and especially our maintenance guys, get in there and fix those leaks or different things that take place.
Mm-hmm. And again, I think the steelworkers are very interesting in that when I think of, well, I teach history, the old Steelworkers Organizing Committee back in the 30s, it became the United Steelworkers. Those were steel workers who worked in plants. And of course, then you've got this merger where you've got OCAW members. Mm-hmm. In the General Tire plant in Mayfield, that was United Rubber Workers. And then you've got people who still are steel workers who work in steel mills. Mm-hmm. How does all that fit together? You've got so many different crafts here. How does that work out?
Well, and then at one time we had the rubber workers,
right,
which was down,
right, and they all these merged. You've got all these mergers. Of course, it was
the glass
and paper workers too, right?
Pace
was paper workers,
and we also have a lot of nurses.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's something you don't think of as steel workers being nurses, but there are, especially up around the Louisville and Eastern Kentucky area. Mm-hmm. I think the leadership within the steelworkers has done a good job, just like with the oil sector. You know, they have their own bargaining unit within the steelworkers that just deals with the oil sector. They have their own unit that deals with the nuclear sector, mm-hmm. you know, that Paducah is involved in, whether it's in Nevada or Washington or wherever. The paper sector, they have their own specific things that deal with paper, and they have set this up. The chemical sector is probably one of the smaller parts of the larger with the steelworkers, but we are well represented. And, you know, as far as on their safety and health committee up there in Pittsburgh, they have specific people that deal with things just like what we deal with, you know, with the petrochemical businesses, and with the because they work pretty close with the oil refineries and things like that, because a lot of those intermix, because, you know, if you have oil, you're going to have chemical processes mm-hmm. not far behind. So mm-hmm. I think, you know, with the nurses, don't really know a whole lot about that, but I do know that they have their own set of programs dealing with that. Mm-hmm. So
another thing it'd be worth talking about is all the various community activities unions are involved in. The Telethon of Stars, yep. Annually thousands of dollars are donated by union members to that. What are some of the things that your local does along those lines?
A couple of years ago we put on a drive and had a large, to me it was a large donation, kind of the first time I got involved as far as raising money for the Telethon of Stars. I can't remember the number that we actually got up and donated now, but I did learn that a lot of our members actually, you know, we went around within a matter of weeks and raised a couple of thousands of dollars just by asking, you know, hey, we're going to take this action on. Last year, what we did is we got involved with the Benton Family Resource Center up there in Marshall County, and we put on a food drive. And Westlake Chemical found out, you know, also has a large food drive where they'll pull, you know, some tractor trailers up there just filled full of food. And those guys, whether they work over at the PVC plant or over at the monomers plant, they do a tremendous job. And so this year we're going to continue that. And they have what they call a snack pack for kids program, where, you know, where the kids that can't have a whole lot to eat, they send them home with a snack pack or something like that for the weekend. And you know, that's a good undertaking by that organization, and we will certainly this fall, right before Christmas and during that time, put on a drive through our plants again. Mm-hmm. So
the other hat you wear in the about 2 or 3 minutes we have left is you are the Financial Secretary Treasurer for the Area Council, which is a group of area unions, as you know, mm-hmm. and so you get to crunch numbers there too.
I do. Let me mention, I have a great financial secretary, Jim Gregory, up at my own local union. And Jeff Wiggins is the president of the Western Kentucky AFL-CIO.
Who is also a steel worker.
Who's also a steel worker, but I'm his financial secretary. And I hope
so
I do a
who's
good
easier
job.
to work for, Jim or Jeff?
Jim.
Oh, hope Jeff isn't watching.
Yeah. Jim does a great job. He's held that position since 1974.
Wow.
And whenever you have a financial secretary who keeps all the books straight, who has everything done by the IRS, who has everything done by the state, and all your books are straight, that makes a tremendous
That's
difference.
a blessing.
It is.
It is.
And so I hope that in helping Jeff out, that I can show the same thing that Jim has done for my local and helping Jeff.
Yeah,
so
that's a, yeah, there are numbers people and there are word people, and I'm most definitely a word person. Numbers, that's a tough job to do. One other quick question, how many years is your term as president of your local?
3 years.
3 years.
3 years.
That's interesting. Normally you think of 2 or 4 year terms. Any reason why 3 years?
I don't know. Under OCAW, at one time we had 1 year terms.
1 year terms?
1 year terms, and I guess if you had some issues and people didn't like you, they could just, vote you right out.
Right.
And I had 2 year terms, and this year, or we just recently went to 3 year terms under the Steelworkers structure. So anyway, we'll see how those come out.
Mm-hmm. And then the other hat you wear, of course, is president of the Western Kentucky Labor Day Committee. By the time this program probably airs, the parade will have come and gone. What made you decide to take on that hat? Now you're wearing another hat.
Yeah, and that's been a pretty busy hat. Whenever you're involved with the community and whenever you're involved with people, this was something a little bit different, and I knew that I'd meet a lot of great people within the state and local government, and also too just here and around. So Labor Day is a fun time. Sometimes our jobs as presidents are not always fun because we're dealing with some hard issues, some difficult issues sometimes, but the Labor Day parade is fun, and I can't say any more than that because I look forward to it, and that part makes me happy, just knowing that we can bring that to the community. Mm-hmm. Because watching the children, whether they're grabbing candy or dancing around or whether being on these inflatables, they're having fun, and when I know that something I can do to help kids have fun, it brings a blessing to me. So.
Very good. We're out of time. You'll have to come back again later. I enjoyed this thoroughly. So.
Well, thank you, Barry.
My guest today was Brandon Duncan. I'm Barry Craig. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.